Thank you. Thank you, David. That was very helpful. The point here about socialist license to operate, that mentioned it, very central, that all of us came together for this debate 2.5 years ago with a shared vision, a shared understanding. I think it has a dual imperative, that this is an important resource environmentally, economically. The potential is generational. However, the resource must be developed prudently. You cannot have one without the other. That was universally accepted by all of us in the room. That was sort of the price of entry to the group. That's what John Hanger understood when he looked through his virtual Rolodex and said, who do I know that really is engaged in this dual understanding of the obligations to the communities in which this operations was starting to unfold. Equally, it's about, as David made very clear, about the broad collaboration. That we all see, again, we were also shell-shocked, I think, walking in the room in early 2011, that this debate had become so vociferous. Across the spectrum, you had really two strong polarities developing, and either one was particularly helpful or informative, and in fact, ultimately is detrimental to finding the best outcomes for the Commonwealth and for the region in general. There's some within the industry side, it's for the old drill, baby drill, stay out of our way, we know what we're doing, no need to look behind the curtain. And on the other side, that these molecules should stay in the ground, fossil's not the way to go. This cannot be done prudently, the risks are too great. All of us felt that was not ultimately where this debate should go. I think Shell says it well, the rational middle. And I think I take a little bit of a shot at Shell, compatriots of Shell, that rational sort of implies that if you're not in the middle, you're irrational. I'm not sure that's a particularly good way to draw people into the debate, but I think reasoned discourse is the way to think about it. And as David mentioned, when we came together, there was a lot of suspicion, and in large measure, the idea of doing this inside a closed room, locking us in for 2 years, having this done outside of the public space, was a double-edged sword. It allowed us to build trust primarily. When we first walked into the room, what I recall in the spring of 2011 was we were getting our coffee on Danishes early mornings, large conference room in a law firm in Pittsburgh. And we sat down and looked around and realized all the industry folks had sat down on one side of the table and all the engineers had sat down on the other. Oops, should have had a seating chart. But also I thought, noble idea, but this ain't going anywhere. We'll talk for a time, we will have an interesting discourse, but this will never get to an end result. We're too far apart. That first morning we sat there and lobbed the proverbial grenades at each other. This is my entrenched position, this is my entrenched position, and there was no movement towards middle ground. But John was prescient, and he brought the right people into the room, but he forced us to stay there, cajole, twisted arms. When things got tough, we made some adjustments. It's not linear, but over time, what really occurred was building the relationships that people were able to then put ideas forward that would not have been interested or willing to do if it had been a very public debate. And it was also, just in the realm of getting the right people in the room, it was that we had the technical folks in the room. These were the postdocs in atmospheric science or geomorphology or the engineers that are boots on the ground and on the rigs with decades of work in this across the spectrum from the industry to the NGOs and foundations. So in a way, maybe in a naive way, we did look at this in the mirror or the perception, the vision of how does this play in DC or how does this play in Harrisburg or Columbus or Charleston. Thought this is a technical problem, how do we solve it? We had a question about how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from well completions. You put a bone on the table, and the technical folks, by their bend, by their tendencies, by their tradition, take that and solve it, regardless of what side they came from. And over time, you notice that you put something on the table, and one of the energy folks and the industry folks will say, yeah, this is how you can solve that. This is what these emissions are. or on the environmental engineer side, saying, all right, I understand the limits of what is feasible in the ground from an engineering perspective. This is how we can crack that nut. It became a very collaborative exercise, and that's what ultimately I think the underlying current and underlying value is building a consensus. You can look across our society when there's the shutdown of the federal government, that we seem to have lost in many realms the ability to reach consensus and to see agreement outside of our own parochial interests. It's a long introduction. So I have two hats here, full disclosure. I work for one of the natural gas firms. I was dragooned into taking over the interim executive director position when John Hanger stepped aside to run for governor. The seat should not ultimately be held by a natural gas, someone whose paycheck is paid by a natural gas firm. But I was trusted, I think, because I lived in each one of these camps. In my background, I did climate work and carbon capture sequestration work at Carnegie Mellon University, Department of Engineering and Public Policy. I did an 18-month sabbatical under the Rendell administration of the Energy Office at EQT, working primarily on renewables, deploying renewables, and then now my current position. And that was probably a valuable piece that each one of the constituents in here saw something of me in them, but ultimately the perception or the optics should not be that the executive director is that closely tied to a natural gas farm. Additionally, I'm a farmer. I have 210 acres growing sheep, raising sheep and cattle about 30 minutes south of here, very much the nexus of the developments going on. My own firm is on three sides of my farm. We have paths, EQT paths, I have a gathering line across my farm. Apparently, I'm meeting on Friday with a company who wants to put a cattle on my place. So, and our farm is spring-fed, has been since the American Revolution. I take the stewardship seriously. We planted 500,000 trees 4 years ago to protect the riparian buffer, 43 riparian buffer. So I see it both, and it's of salutary value. I see both the 30,000-foot view from EQT Plaza downtown, but I also see it very much on the retail end. I cannot think about these issues and not draw a parallel to the impacts that this potentially has on my farm, on my community in southwestern Pennsylvania. And I hope ultimately that's of some value. So the collaborative piece is critical, and the engagement that's up here, and the standards. We put this group of standards, we took 2.5 years to develop them. We tackled two issues, the preeminent risks. Ground and surface water protection, and then air, broadly both criteria, regional air concerns, as well as greenhouse gas or global gases global impact. And the validation, these standards don't stand alone. If I was a skeptical member of the public, I'd say, what's the value of standards? I do not trust that the corporation is going to abide by any standard that must be promulgated. How do I know? And I draw back to the Ronald Reagan comment about trust but verify. And very much the argument inside CSSD is the verified piece. The standards must work in sync with the verification. We spent the last 6 months augmenting the standards that we put in place publicly in March with a whole series of backstops to ensure compliance throughout the certification period for the operators. So there's a hefty guidance to auditors that as a third party, the independent auditor comes in, they must do a guest audit as well as a field audit, not only contemporaneous with an operator coming forward for certification, but also throughout that certification period to ensure that ongoing compliance with these standards. And that states standard by standard what the auditor must see, documentation must be in place, that not only was a double line impoundment designed, was it paid for, was it installed, is it on the ground, go boots on the ground to ensure that that double line impoundment is working, its leak detection is working. Not only seeing the background on greenhouse gas emissions from completions, but going to well sites during completion, ensuring that all the mechanics are working in place. Absolutely fundamentally important from the public perspective. Additionally, those auditors, which we are in the final stages of putting the original suite of auditors together, they must come with a global work in this area, oil and gas space. They must have the technical depth, the expertise, the length of time on understanding this particular topic to be able to do credible third-party audits. We intend on having an announcement the second week in December, making this public statement about who these auditors are and what this process of certification entails. Additionally, the auditors must be accredited by CSSD to ensure that they are credible, but also the validation piece, as was noted, not only a desk audit, a cursory desk audit, but in the field, going inside the operations and ensuring that what you're seeing on the ground is reflective of what the operators have argued they are doing. Only then do I think this has real credibility in the public space and what is expected of the operators in these communities. The engagement piece, I think there was a very nice Washington Post editorial. And to Dav's point about the polarization of the shops we've all taken, we have. We've taken it from some sides of the industry, some of our industry peers that argue that this could lead to greater regulation or federalizing the regulation. Or how can the uncomfortableness of engaging across this broad spectrum of philanthropy and environmental NGO. But we've also taken it from the other side and said, this shouldn't be done or can't be done prudently. To that point, I thought the Washington Post comment, it was an editorial, was very helpful. Last week brought a hardening breakthrough in the war of fracking. A handful of major green groups and big drillers agreed on environmental standards. We forgive you for raising a skeptical eyebrow. Some in the industry have been claiming that fracking, which involves pumping fluid underground to extract natural gas from rock formations, needs no more rules. Some environmentalists, meanwhile, have been ringing the alarm so loudly that the practice seems too dangerous to be contemplated. But the right path was never to let drillers continue without more oversight, nor is it to ban fracking. America's natural gas boom is too important an opportunity, economic and environmental, to ignore. But sound regulations are needed to ensure that it's not an ecological disaster. These new rules are a large step towards striking the right balance, and everyone involved deserves credit. The Center provides a model for environmental groups too. They advance their cause much further when they accept the company's fracking and push for sound regulation instead of unrealistically insisting that all natural gas stay underground. That speaks of the partnership that came to this and remains in the door today. It's so we have strong environmental NGOs, both regional and globally focused, the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, the Environmental Defense Fund, Clean Air Task Force, for example, and Future Gas Group and Smart Pollution. But also the four energy firms that are here again, regional firms as well as global firms. So super majors of Shell and Chevron, and also EQT Corporation. And then backstopped by foundations, the Heinz Endowments and the William Penn Foundation. And I could not speak too highly from the leadership of any of these groups. They've all been at this with, as I think Conrad Steiner said at our launch, at times there was blood on the floor. And of course there was. If there wasn't, we weren't working very hard. It's really important that that's a three-legged stool. That it's environmental NGO, industry, it's foundations. That speaks to that it is the broad constituency across the space, the decades of work that each of these organizations has put into the environmental health of this region, and also the economic and community health of the region. We were careful to look at pre-existing work. There's been many decades of work in best practice. This is not best practice. This is best practice plus. This is beyond best practice. But as Dab noted, whether it's ASRPG or MSC or API or state DEPs or federal EPA or Bureau of Land Management or different organizations, what energy firms are doing, we looked at all of that suite of what's out there, that universe of practice, and then we took what we considered the best, most protective measures. We tweaked them into measurable standards. Again, since this is has to be audited. Standards you develop must be measurable to be verifiable. And I view this as we're taking some of the shots from the industry side. They're wondering, is this a Trojan horse? Is this an effort, an environmental NGO, camel's nose and intent to get inside their operations and find problems and set the alarm off? That is in many ways why, as a practical matter, it made sense to look at existing body of work. It protected us and inoculated us from the sense that this was coming out of left field. This was somehow hatched from an environmental cabal to get inside and tear us apart. That was, again, one of the more pressing pieces that John brought to this, was build on existing work and then tweak it into what is, in our case, a measurable set of standards. Again, thinking about that sort of three-legged stool piece, on the board of directors, we have energy companies represented, we have environmental philanthropy represented, but we also have, in many ways, perhaps the most important piece, what I think of as non-aligned board members. That's a tongue-in-cheek reference to the Cold War, for any of us who are old enough to remember. But hopefully this causes the Soviets versus the U.S., but I find that of interest in my sort of framework of this is that the non-aligned members, people like Paul O'Neill, former chair of Alcoa, Christy Tubman, of course, EPA, former EPA administrator and governor of New Jersey, Jane Long, recently retired from Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and Jerry Cohen, president emeritus of Carnegie Mellon. Those speak very much to keeping that balance, keeping the seesaw, American on the tea power. Seesaw. And I'm often asked, how do you ensure, how do you spend 2.5 years and get to consensus where many of these groups fall by the wayside? We were working with one of our auditors that worked on the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and they were saying it took them 10 years to get to where we've gotten in 2.5 years. The Center for Offshore Safety has been working on these issues since the Macondo spill for probably twice the length of time as we have, and they're not small. The consensus is that I think all of us have this self-interest. Again, it builds from the relationship building we get, but that we all see the other side. We understand that if we pull too far one way or another, one side drops off en masse. If this pulls too close to the environmental side, the industry will say no mas along the way. Equally, if this pulls too far towards an industry's perspective, the environmental NGOs will say no way out. We're out here. David made reference to that, and Mark Brownstein recently made reference on a PBS fashion and said, if we leave this, we will make it very vocal. It will not be a quiet force. We will leave with very clear message that this failed. All of us are in these, we see it from the other perspective, we understand that we must always hit it down the middle, or this comes apart and dies an early death. That self-interest, I would argue, if nothing else, that keeps us all thinking that consensus is essential, and we must always ensure we think about the other person's perspective. One of the anecdotes I think about in this space is that I was Armin Cohen, president of the Clean Air Task Force, and I were giving a presentation to the editorial board of the New York Times. And after a few minutes, Armin was talking and I was talking. I suddenly realized that Armin was making the industry arguments. And I was making, and they knew that I was wearing the dual hat of EQT. So I was making the environmental perspective. And I thought it was as though we were throwing each other's voices, ventriloquist act. And I thought it couldn't have been more effective to the New York Times to be able to see this and have a staunch environmental organization, CATF, that spent decades fighting industry on air emissions, talking the issues from the industry side, and someone in the oil and gas business making the arguments from the climate arguments, from the regional air quality arguments from the environmental side. That was how it's effective. If we each seemed speaking our perspectives, it would have had no more value than any one of many dozen conversations that the editorial board would hear. But for them to see that we both really internalize each other's messages, we very much wanted to ensure that the other's message got across. For me, that was some epiphany moment. We also, this work didn't happen in a vacuum. In early 2011, the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board on Shale Gas was talking about regional centers of excellence that are measurable, broad stakeholder engagements, equally with the National Petroleum Council, so the industry side of it was equally thinking about balanced perspective, broad stakeholder engagement, tackling all life cycle issues across the space. And then also in some ways the way I like it most succinctly by the International Energy Agency gets to that dual imperative I opened this conversation with about the golden rules for the golden age. So it gets that this is a golden age, critically important resource. Whether you're interested in climate change, you're interested in regional air quality questions, but also if you're interested in economic drivers, but must be in the same sentence, cannot be divorced from one another. And also talking in the first line there, measure, disclose, and engage. That is the work at CSSD. On the context side, we drew conceptually from a lot of work that's out there, and this didn't come from left field. The American Chemistry Council has responsible care. The automotive industry has long had an engagement I'm a huge fan of. The Health Effects Institute, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, the Center for Offshore Safety, the Nuclear Energy Institute. As I noted, when we came together, we tackle two issues, air and water. And so those are the preeminent, very much in the front line of the public's concern about this development occurring around. We need to be, as Gavin noted, it must be adaptive, it must be expansive. We agreed that we would tackle these, put 15 standards on the table, but it's not set in stone as though they're commandments. They must move forward as we understand technology, as we understand science and risk. But equally, we must be more expansive about it across the full breadth of risks that are inherent to this, embedded in this activity, whether it's terrestrial impacts. So what's the impact on forest fragmentation, biodiversity impacts? Is there a risk of induced seismicity, so wells, whether disposal wells or production wells, causing earthquakes? Safety, community impacts, aggregation. When you're layering on many operators over an area, how is that driving air quality questions on the upstream side? I also noted we are riveted from existing body of work and the third-party audit piece, as well as this is basin specific. We're careful to ring fence this in the Appalachian basin. So this is not just Marcellus, this is the whole range of shale gas within this basin. And I'm often asked, is this transferable? Is this not transferable? I think it makes sense that the standards will always be reflective of the basin in which you're operating. There are uniquenesses or heterogeneity in each one of these basins. The Appalachian Basin has its issues of concern, particularly ozone, regional ozone. But if you're looking at South Texas and the Eagle Ford, water acquisition may be a very prominent issue. If you're looking at North Dakota, flaring is a significant issue there. So standards should be reflective of the basin in which this is being contemplated in. But what's transferable is the model. And if you look at our board of directors, people like Paul O'Neill and Christy Whitman and Jerry Cohen and Fred Krupp and Shell and Shell, we're thinking that it's the collaborative piece, it's broad stakeholder, it's verifiability, it's quantifiability, it's building that consensus on standards and backstopping that with an audit function. That's the piece that you can take out not only nationally but globally. And to us, it was something of a surprise, very much to me, taking this on, was that we carefully ring-fence this now, but days not go by when my phone is not ringing from I've got Kazakhstan coming in next week, Ukraine last week, Australian visitors. I was in Houston with a UK contingent. Every Western European nation has walked in our door since March. Brazil was planning to visit, was canceled because the government shut down. CATF, Planetary Task Force, was in China arguing, talking about CSSD. Several of our partners were in London talking about this effort. We had Polish television crews and had a car accident, apparently a fender bender this morning the way in, a television crew from Poland was coming in. And so we've been able to get not only the direct understanding that this is about Appalachia, but the knock-on indirect impact of driving the discourse more broadly. And I've seen that as, to me, as one of the significant values coming out of that. You're putting a line in the sand, you're saying that this is what we can collaboratively do together. This is the front end, this is not the regulatory form, this is the ceiling. This is dynamic, this is moving, this is what understanding of risk is. And that is a message that resonates across the globe, certainly nationally and certainly across the globe. That it provides an opportunity for a public, whether you're a public official or landowners, etc., across the spectrum to be able to say, we don't have to trust what the industry says, we don't necessarily have to trust what the NGO says. The NGO saying the fight that's going on, the diversity, that polarization. You can hold up a set of standards and say, these were collaboratively developed. This may not be the only way to peel this onion, but it is a cut of what is a protected set of standards for human health and the environment. And that speaks volume other than having to disentangle the arguments on each end of this polarization. And to the point, Rich Fitzgerald, the county executive in Allegheny, also took the sort of indirect route to see the value of CSSD. He wanted to develop a gas and near Lakes Park in Allegheny County. But he put out in the public space a request for proposal to say, we'd like this gas developed, but it must be developed from external to the park, so non-surface leads to get the gas from underneath Deer Lakes Park. So no surface impact whatsoever in the park. But whatever firm wins this request for proposal must operate to CSSD standards. He made that very clear in his public statement, very clear in his press release, and it was very much up front in the lease itself, non-lease. And I could not find, to me, a better argument for the success of this model than it's being adopted indirectly beyond simply the binary relationship of whichever firms come and choose to move forward, the Shells and Sharrows, the EQT, to be certified to these standards. Quick rundown of the standards on the groundwater side. So first and foremost, zero discharge to ground or surface water. So water must either be recycled, put down a future subsequent fracking operation, or deep well injected, so it's sequestered for geologic time. Wastewater recycling must be at least 90%. Oil water must be recycled at least 90%. Closed loop drilling, so eliminating drilling pits on well pads, which are both groundwater risk and air emissions risk. Double-line impoundments and leak detection. The leak detection piece is the critical piece. That if an impoundment is impaired, it's punctured, you know instantaneously electrical current is set up through this geotechnical fabric, and we will know that downtown Pittsburgh instantaneously if there's water between the linings and the impoundment. Critical piece for groundwater protection. The area review standard, bottom left. That I think is quite groundbreaking, accounting for the heterogeneity around each one of these pads. That there's uniqueness geographically and geologically around each pad. An operator must account for the risks that are unique to that pad. Groundwater monitoring. Historically, operators do a baseline water sample to know what is existing and be able to make a confident defense that what they did didn't change anything. If someone comes back and says, hey, there's X in my water, so well, it's there, it's there from the start. The significant uplift here is that we do post-operation water monitoring. So over time, the operators are obligated to have independent labs sample water around a pad, ensure that nothing has changed in that groundwater that is due to those operations. As a landowner, as a farmer, for me, that's the lift I wanted to see. It takes the burden off me to have the technical skill, have the funds to invest in the protection of my water. It's squarely where it belongs on the shoulder of the operator to monitor that nothing has changed. Casing and cementing standards to ensure that methane does not migrate. Disclosure standards of fracturing fluid, working and expected within a month to finish. A much more broad suite of disclosures, so you're not only tackling stimulation fluid, but the full life cycle of downhole chemistry from soup to nuts is part of our ongoing disclosure work. Well pad design to ensure that the spill doesn't occur, that it's not getting off the pads of line pads, secondary containment. Again, so that the spill remains on the pad and can be vacuumed up and is not in the ground surface. Spill response notification beyond regulatory requirements. If the spill does occur off the pad, there's an obligation to notify all affected landowners or municipalities that the spill occurred in any size. On the air side, removal of hydrocarbons from flowback and produced water. Of course, we are envisioning that there's still open impoundments. They're concerned about air quality around these impoundments coming from entrained hydrocarbons. Our standard requires the removal of all entrained hydrocarbons. Reduce emissions completions of a significant lift instead of traditional flaring, the fires you see coming off these well pads. That we have a virtual prohibition against flaring. Gas must be captured and put into a sales line immediately upon well completion. So we're not venting, we're not flaring. So a significant uplift from greenhouse gas perspective, a significant uplift from regional air considerations. We do have a flaring allowance in what are called exploratory or step-out wells. If you're developing a well that is far from existing development, the pipe is not in place to allow you to extract the removal of gas, you are allowed a small length of time to be able to flare. But your flares must be 98% efficient or better, again, to ensure that you're not having significant leakage of methane, which is, of course, a potent greenhouse gas. And then across the suite of engines, from our drilling rig engines to our compressor engines, to frac truck engines, to on-road truck engines, we have standards for all the standard particulate matter, NOx emissions, SO2 emissions, GHG emissions. And condensate tank control, a long concern in the basin has been about volatile organic compounds, rare toxics from condensate tanks, where we're having liquid hydrocarbons stored on a well pad. These tanks must be controlled, at least 95% controlled, or destructive for VOCs or for air toxics. Again, a significant uplift for local air quality concerns. And then on the greenhouse gas side, reciprocating compressor engines, pneumatic controllers, which historically have some risk of leakage. We have in place directed inspection and maintenance that you must be out in the field. This was the recent development out of Colorado. It was a very simple exercise. You must be in the field monitoring, finding leaks, and repairing those leaks. Again, that's how we, if you think about natural gas as a bridge fuel and the climate change issue, displacing coal, it only works if you are minimizing the upstream methane leakage, and this in large measure is targeted at those emissions. In closing, since we've come up on our hour, I've noticed a note about blood on the floor. But consensus is not easy. All of us took risks. I thought it was important to get this out, even though we have 15 set of standards that are limited on these two issues, air and water. It's not the whole suite yet. It needs to be tweaked. It's all in a perfect document. The verification, certification pieces are clearly imperfect and can be tweaked and refined and adapted over time. But set a line in the sand that keeps all of us there, proverbially keeping your feet to the fire. Shell's obligated to this, EQT's obligated to this, Pennsylvania Environmental Council's obligated to this. We cannot take this back. It's like unringing the bell. Everything is out there. We drive the discourse, we drive the regulatory debates, we drive the discourse in the basin, we drive the conversation with the trade organizations, API and MSC. Those are important parts of this message, is that you are setting a standard that says, look, come chase us, do this, let's use this as a salutary exercise to pull the discourse towards where we all need to be, the prudent development of this valuable, potentially valuable resource.
We'll take questions now for about 25 minutes, and down in there, would you repeat the question when